Welcome back to the San Diego Opera Podcast. I'm Nic Reveles, and my guest today is the conductor of our production of Rigoletto, Steven White. Steven, Maestro, welcome.
Great to be here.
Great to be here. Let's get right to it. This is an amazing score, and there are so many miraculous things about it, not the least of which is that Trovatore, Rigoletto, and Traviata were written virtually at the same time,
almost
within like
all
a two-year period.
That's exactly right.
It's extraordinary.
It is, and of course all three of these are masterpieces. And the thing that's interesting to me is that you see so many of the same musical materials from a craftsmanship standpoint that Verdi uses. But to me, each piece sounds so completely different.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's so funny. You hear the death rattle for Traviata, bum, ba ba bum, ba ba bum, which is the same thing as the Miserere and Trovatore. You know, you hear the bum, ba bum. But for some reason, you don't mistake the two. You know, it's the same, very similar materials, but there's an appropriateness with how he uses these materials that I think is a sign of genius. I mentioned the other day.
Excuse me, but each of those moments, as dawned on me as you were talking, each of those moments is unique in their place in the opera. For instance, at the end of Traviata,
right.
You don't hear that anywhere else in the opera.
That's correct. Right.
And in the Miserere and Trovatore, you don't hear anywhere else. So it's not like one of those pieces of melodic material or a rhythmic motif that's extended or developed in any way.
Right. It's just a pure. It serves the dramatic purpose for that moment, uniquely. Even though it has perhaps some of the same materials, and I would say that people that say that operas of a certain style all sort of sound similar. I think the more you, and this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, the more you know them, the more you know them, and you know their uniqueness. And Rigoletto is perhaps the most unique of all three of those, in that I think there is more original material, if you want to say, and the Tinta is so completely specific from beginning to end. It's unbelievable.
I also feel that Rigoletto is more of an experiment than Trovatore or even Traviata. Traviata has some wonderfully sort of forward-looking moments, but I think Rigoletto has more of that. It feels like he's really trying to stretch the form.
Well, exactly. The idea of doing, for example, in Siamo, taking the recitative that had been much more what we associate with old-fashioned recitative, recitativo, and then now making it much more sung, this idea of almost an arioso. And Siamo is a perfect example of that. So he gives a sung quality to so much of the recitative, which was, at the time, rather revolutionary.
Right. Speaking of Siamo, because I was going to bring it up, you've got scene one, at least in our production. It's scene one in the Duke's court.
Right.
And then change of scenery, and we have the duet with Spadafucile, who is the assassin.
Right.
And immediately upon Spadafucile leaving, we get this monologue, this arioso that you're talking about, Siamo. What strikes me is that Rigoletto will sing a phrase, usually unaccompanied, and then the orchestra comments. And back and forth. This is this incredible dialogue. And anybody who's studied opera or listened to opera, you would never say this is an aria. Right? It is so strange and so unusual from anything that it seems to be that Verdi wrote prior to that.
Well, what's very interesting, particularly about Siamo, is that he is, at this point, he is saying that I am the same as Spadafucile. I'm an assassin with my tongue, with my words, and he's an assassin with the way we traditionally think of assassins, with a sword. But the way it begins, is it's a throwback to the earlier scene. That is the same music where very specifically Rigoletto was teasing and mocking Monterone. That's
yes.
same. That is the exact same. That's the same music.
Yes, it is.
It's the same music. And so we think in terms of when we say leitmotif, we're of course almost always talking about Wagner. But I mean, there's so much. There's so much music in Rigoletto that is that intimates very specific things.
Right.
The very first notes of the piece, with the trumpet. Ba-bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. It's the same music that is, every time he reflects, when Rigoletto reflects, this old man has cursed me.
And the maledizione.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of a curse motive that we hear throughout the piece. But there are all other kinds of references the same way. And they're so subtle. They're so very subtle. Rigoletto is a masterpiece in that way. There's not a wasted note. There's not a wasted moment. And it all is used, the music, to drive this very unique drama.
Yeah.
There's nothing else in the literature, I think, that is so at one time both strange. Rigoletto, you can't. The story is strange.
Oh yeah, it's really odd.
It's macabre,
particularly for the time. It's just out of this world.
But yet there's so much beauty that I think almost anyone can identify with, and so much tragedy that I think almost anyone could identify with, even if not the specifics of the circumstance, the general overarching theme.
Yeah,
it's unbelievably poignant.
And very human, and I think very much to the point today. I had a wonderful conversation with Michael Cavanaugh, the stage director, just yesterday about this very thing, and it's so unique. Now, Rigoletto, the character, I don't think any of his moments you could actually call an aria, could you?
Well, Cortigiani, of course, it's considered a scene where he breaks down, and I mean it is traditionally called an aria in terms of how we think of it. We think of it as an aria, but it's a scene that occurs with the chorus, and then the most aria-like aspect of it is the last half of it, where instead of just being angry, he finally breaks down and begs, and actually begs the courtiers to have pity on him, and that's as close as you would have to it being an actual aria in the same, nothing at all in the same sense of Di Provenza or Il Balen, in Trovatore. This is much more of an integrated scene-like outburst.
Yeah, the only places that I can think of that he has these moments of what you would consider an aria with a tune, with an Italianate phrase, come out of his duet with Gilda.
Yes,
it's really, creating a character for opera like Rigoletto with warts and all, being as human as he is, both good elements and bad elements, and those that are in between, remind us of us.
Yes,
right.
Yes, absolutely.
But musically, he's created him in a way that he is not like any other Verdi character.
Right.
Maybe Iago. Maybe he gets a little,
well, he doesn't have the pure unmitigated evil as Iago, obviously, and you're not suggesting that.
But musically,
from a musical standpoint, you're right. And the other thing too, this very strange person that Rigoletto is. He's a strange person with a strange job, but the music that Verdi wrote for him is unspeakably beautiful, unspeakably beautiful, and in the last act alone, I just can't imagine how a baritone gets through that. I'm just from an emotional standpoint. It's hard, of course, it's terribly difficult to sing.
Yeah.
But the emotional. In fact, actually, talking with Steve Powell, our magnificent and beautiful Rigoletto.
He's amazing.
I think he has to really show discipline himself to be able to get through it emotionally. Yeah. Because the music is so beautiful and so powerful at the same time. It's incredible.
You spoke the other day about the tinta, and this is a word that Verdi uses over and over again.
Yes.
It's, when he's presented with a story, a libretto, or an idea, almost the first thing that he goes for is what's the color going to be of this particular opera. The color of this opera is certainly dark.
Right.
But it's not dark like
exclusively
any other of the Verdi operas. I'm thinking dark Trovatore. It's not the same color.
No.
At all.
No.
How do you account for that? Is it the orchestration? Is it simply the way he approaches it compositionally?
It's hard to say, actually. I mean,
it really is. I never really understood what he means.
Well, it's a spirit. I'll tell you, the other opera of Verdi's that jumps out with a very specific Tinta to me is Don Carlo. You know, it has, and you don't mistake Don Carlo from beginning to end.
Nope.
And it's unique. Again, using some of the same materials, but it has that same kind of thing. I think it is a combination of all of the elements, that is to say, the story, the text, specifically the words, and of course the music, and how all three of those things fit together and create, you know, we say color, but it goes beyond, you know, actual color, and it's mood, it's ethos, it's the entire aesthetic of the piece, and nothing ever comes out of it. I mean, nothing ever goes outside that Tinta. Right. Even when we have moments of great joy. So, for example, the entrance of Gilda for the very first time. That music, that C major music, is some of the most incredibly buoyant music. But yet, in context of all of this, it is enough light to sort of lighten some of the shadows, but it lets us know that those shadows are there, and you know, you could say the same thing about the relationship between the Duke and Gilda. You know, their first encounter that we see on stage, and with the duet and how they sing "Addio, addio, speranza." I mean, it is such effervescent music.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But yet, the fact is, the story, which we know, and the situation, which we know, is still troubling at that moment. And so that's not unbridled from the audience perspective. That can't be unbridled enthusiasm for these two people.
No.
Because the Tinta of this piece, from a dramatic standpoint, still makes us have reservations about this.
Right.
And we see and we hear this, and at a certain level, we're troubled by it.
Yeah.
Because it is such unmitigated joy from their standpoint. You know, I've always thought, and this is a funny thing. This is a little off subject, but you know, we tell people to go study operas, and this is true. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this. You know, go study an opera. You know, study the plot and do everything before you go to it, so you know exactly what's going to happen. You would never tell that to someone to go see a movie for the first time.
No.
You know what I mean? And so it's what I try to do with every opera, even if it's, you know, the whatever umpteenth time I've conducted or I've gone to see it, is I try to stay in the moment of that, so that I don't know. I try to escape the foreknowledge that I have about what's going to happen to the end. And I think that is a sign of genius, that even though we know what's going to happen, by the time we get to that last act and we see Gilda getting ready to go into the tavern and sacrifice her life, not only for the Duke but also for her father, there's something in us that says, no, Gilda, don't do that. Even though we know it's going to happen, we know what's going to happen, but because of the greatness of the creator of this piece, we are still pulled in, and we're just begging her not to do it.
You know, you just answered my last question.
Oh my goodness!
Which was, what is it about Verdi's operas that keeps us feeling like we're on the edge of our seat? There's a sense of dramatic propulsion from note one to note end that just pulls you, doesn't it?
Yes.
It is really, I mean, that is a unique character, I think, of Verdi.
Yes. Well,
that, very few other composers have.
Incredible genius. And you know, Verdi, Rigoletto is not a long opera at all. 4 big scenes. Sometimes, like in the Schirmer edition, people think, oh, it's 4 acts. It's really 3 acts, and with the first one divided up into 2 scenes, with quite an economy of means. It goes from one thing to the next. And I was doing some reading about Verdi's ideas about any opera whatsoever. And I was reading Otello because I conducted Otello recently, and just his general idea is that the last act should be the best. He actually felt like the last act should be. I mean, he really and I don't know. You could look at every opera and say, is every last act of Verdi's operas the best? I don't know, but I can't think of many bad ones.
Yeah,
you know.
really.
And this last act of Rigoletto is just.
It's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary.
It really is. I love geeking out with conductors.
I love being able to talk with someone who not only, most importantly, loves the music, but really knows it too. That's a real pleasure.
It's great stuff, and you're very welcome. We're all looking forward to the opening on Saturday night.
Thank you.
And welcome to San Diego for the first time.
Thank you.
And I hope we see you again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you.